All right, I
Hello,
think we're here.
everyone.
Someone talk. We're
Okay,
here.
sorry. This is going so sorry. This, as you're probably seeing, you're not seeing the familiar faces that you usually see, right? So we are. I'm Roberto. You have Aaron and Eric with me. So really happy to join today for well, picking up on everyone else that's going to join today and pick up some Quarkus insights. So today is episode 152, so 152. So that those there are too many sessions already. So I hope that you are bearing with us and for another topic. And yeah, so before we go to the actual session that we have for today, let me actually talk to you about some of the Quarkus news from last week. So if you haven't noticed, we released the 3.7 branch for Quarkus. So now we actually on 3.7.1. And a couple of the new features, which actually was better for other people to be presenting because they actually had the work, even though I do work on the Quarkus support team, they did most of the work themselves. Anyway, the biggest feature that we have, well, no, I won't say the feature, but the biggest change that we are moving for Quarkus 3.7 is the update for a minimum version of Java 17. Right, so if you remember, when Quarkus 3 was launched, we did announce that we were going to move for 17 at some point. 11 was already deprecated for us, even though we knew that we had to support 11 for some time. And this was announced in November, so it shouldn't be really big news. But now, when moving for 3.7, you do have to update your Java version to 17. If you want to use 21, feel free to use 21 as well. So Quarkus does work with 21 as well, but the minimum version for Java will be 17 from now on. So this is one of the big news and will be a little bit breaking change, but I'm pretty sure that most of you are already using a higher version than 11, even for older versions of Quarkus, right? Maybe not. Yeah. So another thing that we did, which it shouldn't be like a big issue for all of you, but we knew that there was some misconceptions and some confusion around the REST Classic and the REST Easy reactive extensions. So we did change some of the naming. So there is like a clear separation on what is reactive, what is not, even though it shouldn't change too much your programming model. And we add relocations for those. So you shouldn't see any changes regarding that. But now it should be more clear for you which REST easy you should be using, if you should be using classic or reactive. And well, our recommendation, of course, is to use the reactive extensions for all the rest stuff. Another big change that we're shipping with 3.7 is a couple of updates to Hibernate. So Hibernate ORM is now 6.4, but also we're moving to Hibernate Search 7 and Hibernate Reactive 2.2. So these bring a lot of new changes. There is like a management endpoint for Hibernate Search that allows you to trigger max indexing and do a lot of maintenance work. So that should be a little bit easier for you to manage. Now, moving a little bit to the future. So Quarkus 3.8 is going to be the new LTS release for Quarkus. And the next community release, we're going to move for 3.9. So we're going to be working on those in the next couple of weeks and months. So feel free to look on the new roadmaps for those versions. Because as you know, work's not going to stop, and we are more than happy to keep pushing forward, adding new features, and updating a lot of the things that are coming new on Quarkus. So those were the news for the Quarkus side of things. Now, moving to the topic today, we're going to talk about a little project. Well, I'm probably not going to call it little because it did start little, but now it's become like a little bit of a monster, I guess, which is the Quarkus Superheroes project that Eric has been working pretty much nonstop in the last couple of months. I guess so, right?
It's the last couple of years. It's
Yeah.
2 years
Well,
old now.
yeah. How passed the time passed really quick, right? I guess that a couple of years ago, Quarkus was still on two, and we didn't even notice how much we have accomplished over the last couple of years.
This
But
is kind of
still,
like our annual, hey, what's been going
yeah,
on? What's new? Not that I'm just filling a gap, but
yeah. I didn't remember the first couple of times that I tried it out, and now I remember picking that up like recently because of some issues that you reported to me, right? Which
Yes.
sometimes we do some back and forward and fight each other on GitHub issues. It's really, really interesting, but it's fine. And yeah, I was amazed how much that grew since the last time I've seen it. So I'm pretty happy to actually seen it like coming from you for us to tell us directly what did you did and what did you change and what are we looking for the Quarkus Superheroes repo. So without any further delay, I'll give the host to you and feel free to start showing us stuff.
all right. So look at that. It even realigns us. I didn't have to click any buttons here. So this for those who aren't familiar with the superheroes, and this is the slides that I'm going to show here, like very, very low key. I'm going to do a lot of demos and kind of show you what's been going on in the last year. So this started, I'm trying to even think, it was like 2021, towards the end of 2021, we kind of got in a room and said, hey, we don't really have, like, we've got the guides and we've got the quick starts and those are great for like, hey, I want to trying to do like one thing, it focuses on like how to do like one little thing, but nothing like cohesive that ties everything together, and how to test everything, how to deploy everything, how to show GitOps, how to show CI/CD, how to show like we're to the point now from a maturity perspective where we're doing automatic pull request merging. Like people's hands are completely off of this, like for dependency updates and Dependabot and whatnot. It's like does its thing, it does its tests, and then if everything is good, it auto commits and auto merges and then automatically creates images and whatnot. So it's pretty, from an automation perspective, it's pretty hands off actually. Because I don't know about you. I mean, I create tons. I mean, I speak at a lot of events and I create tons and tons of demos, and I always use things like Dependabot to keep stuff up to date. But like every morning you coming in, you've got like 100 emails from Dependabot from various projects. Like this was updated and that was updated. And it would take me like an hour every morning just to go through
The Monday flood.
Yeah, the Monday, like to merge. And I'm like, you know what? I write pretty good tests and I'm pretty confident if my test suite passes that it's good to merge. It's very, very infrequent where tests pass and then I merge and something blows up and I have to back it out. And I'm like, you know what? Enough of this. I can take the kind of the human for stuff like that, for simple things, I can take the human intervention right out of it. And it's, completely self-automated and whatnot. So that was kind of something we did this year. But so let's talk a little bit about, get my mouse. So if we look at I'm just going to go to the repo here. So the GitHub, it's in the Quarkus org. Is the font size big enough or make it a little bigger?
Bigger.
There
we go.
Is that good?
Yeah.
So the GitHub repo, like I said, originated in 2021 and it's actually started. So there's the Quarkus Superheroes workshop that the Quarkus team owns. And this kind of originated from that. It took that as a starting point. And then there's been quite a divergence from that, because the goal of the workshop is to kind of keep things simple, to learn about how to build some stuff, where this has evolved at a much higher rate and more towards like, how would I build and deploy an actual application? So from a high level perspective, if folks haven't seen it, and if I can even fit the whole architecture diagram on one screen, I will. Hang on here. Let me see if I can fit it on one screen. Open this in new tab. There we go. So it's kind of evolved as a system of microservices, and I'll talk about some of the new services we've added this year in the last year. But we've got the front end, which was originally written in Angular and was deployed via Node.js. That's something that's changed this year, and I'll talk about that. There's a Fight microservice, which uses MongoDB that talks over REST. And then there's 4 different microservices behind that. 3 of them are REST. So there's the hero and the villain service, which both talk to Postgres. those services are essentially the same application, except one is fully reactive and one is fully blocking. So it's kind of good, showcases, if you're looking to do fully reactive with like reactive database drivers and all that good stuff, it shows that the villain service is completely blocking imperative.
I love how the evil one is the imperative one. Very, very subtle messaging there.
Yeah, very subtle. You said it, not me, right? At the bottom, I'll come back to at the bottom, we've got the statistics microservice, which talks through, it's event driven. So it reads messages off of Kafka that are put there by the fights microservice. And then it has its own little simple JavaScript based UI that talks through WebSockets. They all have OpenTelemetry. There's an OpenTelemetry collector as part of the system that works pretty well. And it has a Jaeger that can read from OpenTelemetry. Some of the new things that got added this year. So we've got this location microservice, which is fully blocking, but its communication protocol is gRPC. So there's no REST in there. It's all gRPC, and it's all written in Kotlin. So there's no Java in there. It's all Kotlin. And it uses, just to pick a different database, it uses MariaDB instead of Postgres. So if you're looking at doing different things. And then we've got this new narration microservice, which is blocking as well. And this has integration with LangChain for J and the Quarkus LangChain extension. So it can talk to OpenAI and Azure OpenAI for narrating fights. And
that's awesome.
And we'll get into that in a minute, and how I've set this up. So like kind of one of the goals of the whole system is it's got to be stupid simple to work. Like if you want to run it on your machine, you shouldn't have to like tweak config files, and like you shouldn't have to follow a wiki just to run the damn thing. So like how you would do local development of any one of these services in isolation of all the others. So I'm going to talk about things like Microx and WireMock and all the different dev services that go with them, so that it's each piece of this is completely standalone from every other piece from a development perspective, and
which is the required way for you to build something for it to actually evolve well over time. You don't do the whole stand the whole thing up. Everybody's got to be its own little piece. Yeah, perfect. Yep. I love this.
Yep. So the other kind of interesting thing, which is kind of on the side of this, is we've integrated, if I go back kind of to the main wiki page, all the applications we've integrated with Sonar Cloud. So as part of the CI/CD process, it gets scanned every build essentially, and it publishes. Each microservice has its own, and we put all the statistics, maintainability. But if I go over here to Sonar Cloud, all the different services are there. What's kind of cool with the UI service is we're using, because we've now switched from Angular Node.js to Quarkus Quinoa, and we're using React. Quinoa. Yeah, and we're using React. And so Holly was the person who actually did that. She did that conversion and whatnot. But as part of that React integration, we're actually using React Test, and we're scraping all the code coverage and the metrics from the React side as well as from the Quarkus side, and we're combining them and being published to this dashboard. So when you look at the code coverage and the test coverage and all that, it's all combined between the Quarkus Quinoa and the React side in the same application. So
to clarify, if people don't know what Quinoa is, Quinoa lets you. I think we have some other folks in within the Quarkus community that are trying to do, we have a whole other way to do front end in Node and JavaScript also. But Quinoa lets you run normal Node build processes as part of your Maven build without putting the Node stuff in your POM XML. So for me, for some people, it's I want everything in my POM, and I'm like, please, no, I don't. No, I like the Node stuff to be Node stuff, but it's really nice when it can all build together, and the life cycle is linked, even though the two, the ecosystem bubbles kind of remain clean. It's amazing, and I love it.
Yeah, and for dev mode and continuous testing, both your front end and your back end are all just there.
Exactly. They all work together. I did mine with Svelte instead of React, which just,
pick your own UI framework.
They both work.
Throw it on top.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, so if I fire this puppy up here, so I've got a bunch of different terminals. So you'll see as the log goes by here. So I'm just going to fire up the UI. So it is a Quarkus application 3.7.1. Like I said, it auto updates itself every version. It just auto updates and it runs all its things. You can see Quinoa is actually running npm install. It's building all the Node modules, and then so it's serving the UI on one port and the Quarkus app on another port. And so I've got everything just kind of up and running here. And if I go back to my browser, you see if I refresh the browser, it's actually up and running. I've got superheroes. I can change. Well, I can't really change fighters because like I kind of talked about, you can develop this in isolation. It doesn't require any backend service. So like if we look at like the dev UI here and we look at the dev services that are running, so we're actually using Microx here in the UI to serve canned responses for whatever backend it would be. And if I go in, find the Microx UI is actually embedded in the dev UI here somewhere. It was yesterday. Here it is. I have this like thing that the more eyes that are watching, the more things that just kind of break.
That's the way it rolls, man. That's how it works.
So if I look at like my application list here, the fights, because if remember the architecture diagram, the UI application only talks to the fights microservice. Right. So because the fights microservice is REST, its open API document is included at build time in the UI. And now I have the Microx has mocks for all of the interactions that the UI could perform on the fight service. And so one of them is like get random fighters, for example, here. So I can look in to the get random fighters. It's got kind of a, it's scraping from the open API document, and it actually gives it an endpoint. So I could copy this endpoint here and I can just go to my browser and paste it in and I get a default response.
Got it. So I have a question. Yep. Because I haven't been paying attention, so everybody can yell at me for not paying attention. The last time I was really working on an application like this, when I got to this stage of testing and stubbing out, I would have been using Pact. So what is the relationship between Pact testing and Microx? And like your face just did a thing. So like, What did I do? Did I say something?
So Pact is used only during testing. So Pact would be consumer driven, and I'm going to talk about Pact in a little bit with some of the other things.
Oh, good. If we want to table it, come back to it, we can do that. That's great.
So, but from the kind of the short answer is you would use Pact both. So Microx can do contract testing as well, but they're from the provider side, so it's driven from the provider,
right?
Whereas Pact is driven from the consumer. But I'm not testing here yet. I'm just running the application, and I've got Microx that's kind of sitting as a container sidecar to my app that's serving me responses. Pact isn't going to do that for you.
Okay, I used to think my memory said that Pact could do that mocking.
So it'll do a mock server while you're running your tests, but not when your application is
but not forever.
Not forever.
So do they share data then, or do you have two separate paths for the mocked responses?
So Pact isn't going to read your open API. So this stuff here is coming right from the open API doc directly. So at build time, the fight service will build and generate an open API doc that'll then go into the source repo for the UI. There's some CI. I mean, you may or may not do that in the real world, but for a demo,
I see what you're doing.
That's what we're doing. And then the configuration, if we look at the configuration of the UI here, if I drop down.
Okay. No, so you're compensating for drift in the way that Pact does. You're just doing it a bit more for like a dev mode experience.
Yep.
Because Pact also protects from drift, because the producer is still publishing APIs and consumer is publishing input and stuff. Like there is a handshake there for Pact, and you're doing a similar but compensating protect from drift flow just in a different way. Got it.
Yeah, I haven't integrated Pact into the UI tests yet, so that's kind of on the to-do list. But there's Pact. So between like the fight service and its backend services, there's consumer contract tests there, but not between the UI and I'm talking with my hands because I'm Italian, but
everybody talks with their hands.
But you can see
all the time,
here,
I'm not Italian. It's good.
In the configuration of the UI app, where during dev mode, we're enabling the Microx dev service, and we're pointing, because this is a big mono repo, makes this a little easier. I can just point directly to the open API doc that's produced by the fights application, and Microx will just pick it up when the dev service starts.
All right, that makes sense. Sorry for my questions. I'm sure I derailed your whole flow. Keep going.
Nope. So then the superheroes is up. I can, obviously I can't, it doesn't, every time I click a button, it serves the same response because there's only one response. I can do the fight. and then there's a winner. But one kind of cool thing that I'm like totally not a UI person at all. Like I'm total back end person. But one thing I'm super proud of myself is this animation now, because part of what we want to do that's on the roadmap is we want to like add more stuff, because before, there's not a whole lot of information here, but we want to add more like AI, like chat capability between the heroes and villains. And we want to have like a biography auto-generated by ChatGPT. And the original way that the UI was written, it was just, there wasn't a whole lot of space. So actually Antonio Goncalves and I came up with this idea. Well, what if we turn the images into flip cards?
I love
and
it.
then you could flip the cards and you can put more information on the back of the card. And same with the location. We could flip the cards.
So are they gonna like talk? Are they gonna like talk trash at each other before the fight? Is that
Yeah.
like, I love it. That's so awesome.
Yep, some interactive chat between them. Click a button to start it and have it go back and forth and have them talk.
That's
to each
gonna
other.
be it. That's
and have
so
some
great.
Chat between them. So that's on the roadmap of something.
I'm gonna have to do that for Monster Combat. I'm gonna have to like revivify my really super old.
Yep. Yeah. So the question is now. So there are certainly times where you want it to talk to a real back end, right? If I'm developing like the fight service, I might want the UI just because it's easy and convenient to play with stuff. So if I stop it, I can actually turn it off, Quarkus, and I can say the profile of no microx, and it'll actually turn microx off completely. And now it'll be expecting a real back end behind, behind it. So once this thing fires up,
that makes sense.
So now it's up again. If I come back to the UI, obviously it's gonna because there's nothing behind it. It kind of just blows up.
Right.
Probably should handle that gracefully, but in any event. So now if I kind of come over to the fights.
Now this is dev mode user error.
But I mean, one possibility in this case was because you're generating Docker images for all your backend services, you can actually create a Docker image that could use as a dev services to simulate the actual.
Yeah, but see, that's the slippery slope, Roberto. That's the kind of stuff that really bothers me, because people don't understand that testing in isolation is better than starting up all of the other Docker images.
No, sure. But I mean, Eric already shows the testing in isolation, but I'm guessing that maybe you want to try something out on the actual production code, right?
Yeah.
And you may want to try out that. I mean, for instance, one reason is it's really hard for you to figure out if you're breaking the REST API change, because you're testing against something which is static, and maybe you make like some change on the API that's going to break something else, right?
Yeah.
So you may want to just test it with the real thing to make sure that the API is already over there.
Yeah. So that part. Now I started the fight service now, and so now the UI is back. Oops. But it's actually talking to the fight service. But now the fight service also uses microx, and it applies the same pattern to it. So now if I come in to the dev UI in the microx, you can see it's got now all the backends of all of its downstream consumers, both REST and gRPC, because the locations is gRPC, and I can execute all these different endpoints. So it kind of follows the same pattern going back and back and back.
Yeah. You're not wrong, Roberto. I'm not really disagreeing with you.
Like, no, that's fine.
You can use Docker images, right? It's for me though, when I start to see people wanting to do that, I start like, this is a code smell. Like to me, this is when people are not, I guess my experience is that when people start talking about running, they're not ever talking about one Docker image. They start talking about the Docker compose file so they can stand up all 5 images. And once you start talking about that, you are in a slippery slope where you're actually tightly coupled to everything. And at that point, you should just be launching a monolith. Like you're not, at that point, you are no longer dealing with independent pieces. Everything is tightly coupled. You don't have any trust between your system. So I'm hoping when we get to like pack testing and stuff, Eric will show like, here's how the drift is. Like producers should know if they're breaking consumer APIs because of packed.
Yeah.
You shouldn't have to start the container to verify that. I get that it's a safety thing. Like you want to make sure, I get it. But to me, that's a smell, as you might say.
Yeah. Sure. So to Roberto's point, if you wanted to go down that road, every part of, I mean, this has been around. This isn't new in the last year. This has been around forever. But every service here has a deploy folder, which has a Docker compose, which will stand up everything needed to stand up that service. So you could stand up all the backend services using Docker Compose if you wanted to. You could deploy them to Cube and update your configuration to point to something, or you can run them all in dev mode, which is what I'm going to do next to kind of show off some of these other features. So I'm going to start now the fight service back up in, again, I have the same, if I don't want it to use Microx to do something. So now I'm going to go stand up all the other ones. Heroes, villains. Narration, locations. So you can see this starts to get kind of, now I'm starting up like 8 different microservices here. And once the whole system as a whole comes up, so one of the goals of the Superheroes 2 I kind of started to talk about was it just needs to work on your local machine, right? Like everything just needs to work out of the box, and whatnot. So when we started this integration with LangChain and OpenAI and whatnot, that stuff costs real money. Like that's not free. So we put something in here. So by default, it'll not actually make live requests out to the provider because you'd have to provide a key or something. Or in the case of like Azure OpenAI, you'd have to stand up some Azure resources, which again are not free. They cost real money. And we wanted people to be able to try this stuff out without having to put credit card information somewhere and do something. So now that the whole system is up, I added that cool little spinner too. Did you see that?
Yeah,
Cute.
you're really proud from your UI.
I am. My UI skills are like when I can do
Great.
something in the UI, I'm like, whoa, I'm like wicked proud of myself. So yeah, so you can see, and if I do the fight, here's a fight, and then I can click narrate, and you just get some. So it's not actually making a live call; it's just kind of returning some pre-canned response to it, so you can kind of see how it works. But if I wanted to, I could come back here and I could say -d equals OpenAI and then give it my key, which I'm not going to give you for everybody to steal. I have it as an environment variable so people can't see it. So if I start up the app with that profile, and there's a second profile too called Azure OpenAI, which would point it to Azure resources, which I've already pre-created as well. But in this case, it's now going to point to OpenAI. So now if I, new fighters, new location, and I click fight, Thakor is the winner. And if I narrate it, we added the spinner because there wasn't any making calls to OpenAI can take 10, 15 seconds to get a response back. And when we first did the integration, it just kind of sat there and it was like, okay, is it actually doing something? So that's kind of why we added that spinner. So now you can see this narration was actually generated by OpenAI. And you can actually look at the log of the narration service and you can see, there's here it made a request to OpenAI with some information, and here's what it sent, here's what it got back. So 4 paragraphs. And so as far as if you're not familiar with the LangChain or LangChain for J or the Quarkus LangChain extension on top of it, it's like super, super simple to do here. So there's like you don't even write the code. Like this is like what's amazed me over the last year. Like this whole AI and GPT and chat stuff has like completely taken off over the last year to the point it's like stupid simple to do. So like you're a Marvel Comics writer, expert in all sorts, narrate the fight, 4 paragraphs. It's got to be G-rated, workplace, family safe. Like no.
So how long did it take you to tune the prompt? Like, did you, just in case other people are trying to figure this out, like how did you figure out how to tune the prompt?
So part of it, so this originated in Azure with Antonio Goncalves. So he did kind of the first iteration. I tuned it up a little bit after that, but I think what we tuned the most, which isn't actually part of the prompt, is like what's called like the temperature and the top, I think is the percentiles. Like, so if you have a lower temperature, you get a more deterministic response from the AI. So we were kind of getting like the same thing over and over and over again, which is kind of good and kind of bad. Like this is supposed to be fun. So we wanted something where it was a little less deterministic, but then as you increase the temperature, it takes longer for the prompt to come back. So like we moved it to like 0.9 and it took like 35 seconds for the response to come back. So like, well, that's not good either. So we kind of settled somewhere in the middle where it's not completely deterministic, but it still is somewhat different with each thing and it has all the right data. So I personally, I went and I read a bunch of blog posts about, how to, like, what's the best way to engineer a prompt. And so talking about like what you want it to do at the top and then having delimiters in there and providing your own data. So like here it's injecting like the actual information about the fight. And because in Quarkus, in the LangChain extension, it actually uses Qt as a templating language. So because I've got like lots of data that I want to inject, I didn't want to have a method signature that had like 12 arguments in it. So it's all encapsulated in a single object and all the data. So you can just reference the data through like nested object structures within the data, and you can add it to the prompt.
So here's an opinion question for you, given this, because that's part of this makes me squirm. So I don't know if any other old school people like me are going to be like, what? How do you feel about having a big string like right in there in your code? Does this feel normal? Does it feel?
No, it does not.
Because I looked at that and I'm like, gross.
But here's a question. So there's definitely a tie between the data so if you have a prompt that doesn't take data, like you just want to ask a question and get a response, and then so this prompt doesn't have history. There's like it's a
right.
like off shot, and then the next fight, if you do it again, it's a completely different conversation. So we're not keeping track of history, so we're not like sending previous data back to the prompt or anything like that. If that's something you were doing, you might do it a little bit different. But for me, where I'm injecting a lot of data, I can understand that the prompt is tied to the code, right? There's a binding between the prompt and the code, because if I were to change the prompt and add something here that I wasn't passing in, it's going to blow up, right? So, but at me, I'm an OCD developer. I hate having long strings of text. This just bothers me, and so I wish there was a way where it could be read. And maybe that's on the roadmap. I'm not sure. Maybe I could add this as a file.
Annotation?
It's inside an annotation.
Yeah, I have the screen small so that I could see chat things. So when I first saw that, I was like, I have to put that there. Okay. Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Well, feel free to send an issue request.
Yeah. So I think,
either that or I just have to get over it. I'm okay. I mean, sometimes you just gotta deal with it.
Fault tolerance around this too. So like, you have zero control over OpenAI, how long it takes, right? Do you really want it to bust your app and anything else that might be using your app? So like having timeouts and fallbacks. So the LangChain library itself has retry and timeouts built into the library. So that's why I'm not using like the small fault tolerance for timeouts and retries here, because it's built into the LangChain library itself. But I am using circuit breakers. Like if OpenAI goes down, like I don't want to keep trying to hammer it. And then I have a fallback if something bad happens, where like you saw before, I have a pre-canned response that's in the app that really doesn't take into account the data you passed in. You get what you get and you don't get upset, kind of thing. But so as far as now testing this, talking to AI prompts is completely non-deterministic, right? So you can't like do those kinds of assertions. So what I did here is using something like WireMock, which is really good for over the wire things. I probably could have used Microx as well, but I wanted to show it's a sample application. I want to show different approaches to different things. So rather than using Microx here, I'm actually using there's a WireMock Quarkus extension now that runs in dev mode. So when you run dev mode, WireMock actually runs up next to your app, and you can pre-can responses, and it can bind and serve responses back to you. And so that's what this is doing. So there's a source test.
Do you record? Is that what you just said? Is my brain super slow? So I've been playing with the Quarkus GitHub app extension, which is also amazing. Totally tangential to this discussion, but it's also amazing. And one of the things that was added to that was the ability to capture the responses into, like, you can replay them basically. Like, you can grab whatever the response was and then use it later. You have to put it in your own file naturally, but I don't know if we have a way here to capture like the response from one of your backend services as it came out, so you could use it in a test later.
Sure. I don't think so. So like what I did here is, well, with the LangChain, not the Quarkus extension, but with the LangChain for JLibrary, you can turn on log requests and responses, and it'll spit it out to the console. And that's essentially what I did. But because this extension has to support both OpenAI and Azure OpenAI, the URL format is a little bit like Azure OpenAI adds this API version query param to it.
Right.
And instead of using an authorization header with a bearer token, it uses a different header to do authorization, and the key looks completely different. So I had to make this smart enough to understand, like, it doesn't care which one you're using. It'll capture the response or capture the request and serve a response, like under certain conditions. Like, it has a certain system message, it has 2 messages, as a certain user message, the temperature is certain values, and it'll, if it sees any of that, it'll give you a pre-canned response back.
Nice.
Yeah, I believe with WireMock, not with the WireMock extension for Quarkus, but I have to also check on that. But with standalone WireMock, you can proxy the calls through my WireMock to record them.
Yep. Yeah,
you can. And then you can just replay them back in your app with the WireMock connected to the dead mode.
Yep. Yeah, I didn't do that, but yeah, I think you can.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure you can do that with WireMock standalone. I'm just not sure if you can just record them directly with the extension. But even if you can at the moment, you can still do that with WireMock standalone, and then you can just replay whatever you executed.
Yeah, so if we look at, like, for example here, it keeps opening on a different screen. I got to bring it down. So like if you look at, like, so this is the narration service. If I look at it should be running the WireMock dev service. Oh no, you know what? Because I'm talking to a live, the way I've got it in the configuration, if I tell it to talk to like OpenAPI specifically, it'll turn off the WireMock dev service. It doesn't enable it. So the configuration is smart enough to, by default, it'll use it. If I tell it really talk to OpenAI or Azure OpenAI, it won't fire up the WireMock dev service. So like, for example, I could turn this off instead of just dev clean profile is Azure. So instead of, and I have in my, if I go to my Azure portal, I'm just going to take this off the screen for a second, just so I can put in my, and I need my phone.
Credential process.
Yeah, my credential process. I got to go into my my authenticator application here. Now, if I come back to my Azure portal, I've got a resource group, and I've got an Azure cognitive service. And if I go into like the Azure AI portal, I've got a deployment of the GPT-3.5 Turbo in here as well. So if you want to play around with this, there's actually a magic script in here. So if you go into the scripts directory, there's a create Azure OpenAI resources, and you can pass it parameters, and it'll actually go create all the stuff for you, assuming obviously you have Azure credentials and you have that service enabled in your account. You can do that, and it'll create the model for you in the resource group, and you can tell it region to put it in and all that good stuff. But
pretty good. That's so kind of you.
Yeah. We're friendly to Azure. So now if I come back to my superheroes, refresh the page, get a new location, do the fight, and now I do the narration. I actually find the Azure service usually comes back faster.
Wasn't warmed up today.
Yeah, maybe not. Yep. So here's and it actually, what's interesting is it looks similar. Like the prompt that it gives back is similar to to this. And
well, theoretically, you're giving it the same prompt going in, right? So you would expect a similar family.
Yeah. There's actually a bug. I'm not going to scroll up in the log because there's a bug that I just fixed in the Quarkus LangChain extension. It doesn't mask the key. If you log the request and response, it's not masking the key.
Right.
So I fixed that on Friday, but it hasn't been released yet. Yeah, so that's good. That. So look, mom, no backend, flip cards, spinners, dev service. Okay, so let's talk. Let's talk about Playwright for a second.
Okay.
You know what Playwright is?
No.
So
what is Playwright? Tell me, because maybe I'll use it soon. I'm hacking so many crazy things right now. I don't even know. So yes, inform me.
Yeah. Maybe so Playwright is it's a Microsoft thing, and it's for like being able to do automated testing of user interfaces. So you can if you've used things like Selenium or whatnot, it's another framework for talking, but it's made for like backend things. So there's like a Java implementation, there's a Node implementation, there's implementations in a couple different languages, but luckily there's a Quarkus extension for it as well. So if I go to like heroes and villains, and they each, why does this keep opening in a separate browser window? I drag that down. Oops.
I love the flicker as you go across your monitors. It's such a pain.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus. There we go. So like the heroes and the villains each have their own simple user interface. This is like very like backend driven using Quarkus. So this would show you how to use like Quarkus Qt, both reactive and blocking. So how would you build like a template that's served on the backend that serves HTML, and how would you integrate it? So pretty simple. And then I can filter by, I can do filters. So I have a Playwright test, which will actually invoke the UI. It'll find the filter box. It'll type something in. It'll click the heroes button. Then it'll assert that the UI has certain things on the screen. So if I look at UI resource tests, for example, here, so you can see this is a Playwright test. So the first test just asserts that if I go to the index page that it loads, right? And it has a certain title. Then the next test, that after the page loads, I can find that there's a table on the page, right? And that the page has a grid, and that there's a certain number of rows in the table.
Oh, I want this.
Interface. So we can assert that there's 100 elements, 100 rows in the table. And then after that, it can go through and say, hey, find the page, assert that the table's right, find the filter by name box, type something into it, fill it with the word Spider-Man, then find the filter heroes button and click it, and then verify that there's only one row in the table, find the table header, make sure it has all the right values, find the one row, and then for that row, go through and, I don't really care about the ID, but go through, get the href of the URL for the image, make sure it matches what I expect it to match.
Very cool.
Playwright, you can do this kind of stuff you could do it with like the React app as well. I just didn't do it. You could have it like load the React app and do different interactions. And
I want to do this for Pockets, but then I have to remember how Pockets works. I kind of killed my Pockets brain, so I've got to figure that out.
So
that's cool.
What Playwright does.
Yeah, I haven't used Selenium in a really long time, but I remember it being really difficult and unpleasant.
Yeah,
this looks way better.
This is pretty easy.
Yeah, it's a little bit unpleasant.
Yeah, so Playwright.
I like that.
Location.
Show me the pack test, man. We were talking about that earlier. Don't skip it.
Yeah. So
show me the money.
Yeah, so I'll just before we get there, I'm gonna make you wait.
Oh no!
Good things come to those who wait. That's what my parents always told me, right? And that's what we try to teach my kids.
Yeah, teaching kids patience is like whatever.
Yeah,
super hard.
So if you're interested in like how Kotlin works in Quarkus and how gRPC works, there's the location service that does Kotlin, uses Panache with Kotlin and the Panache stuff on top of Kotlin. I'm by no means a seasoned Kotlin developer, so if you find stuff in here and you're like, why did you do it that way? Please open an issue. Happy to do it. Yep.
Yeah.
This is kind of my
me
first
learning
pass.
JPA. Somehow I managed to skip in my formative years anything with JPA. So when I was trying to do pockets, I was like, yeah, just tell me if I'm doing this wrong because I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. Good.
Yep. All right. So
Panache is super great, by the way. If you haven't used Panache, go look at between Kotlin and Panache, you had to have not had to write a lot of extraneous code between the two of them, right?
No, I mean, if you look at like I always prefer the repository. I hate the active record pattern. So unfortunately, I always prefer the repository pattern. I like to decouple my objects and the things that operate on the objects rather than having, and I hate static methods. It becomes a nightmare to try to test things with static methods and to do mocking and stuff. So that's my gripe. I hate active record. So like in the repository pattern, I mean, it's super, super easy, even with like services, like adding the service. Like I just love Kotlin is so less verbose. Like here's I always prefer constructor injection than having fields with @inject on it.
I'm a constructor injection person myself.
Kotlin makes it so easy to do that. Like it's
what?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Oh, now I have to learn Kotlin.
Yeah. And then
you can also do that with CDI beans in Java.
But not right there on the class definition. Look at line 11. Just look at it. Seriously, that's like 12 lines you don't have to write.
People are lazy.
Yeah, people are lazy.
This is totally enabling lazy behavior, but it's still, I like it. Oh no.
Yeah, and if your method is a one-liner, you could just do a one-liner, like, and then you can do like assignments and whatnot. And I love that Kotlin treats like Java 8 brought this optional thing in, which has just been a big mess because nobody really understands what the right way to use it, right? To try and get around, this whole nullability thing is, can something be null or not? Well, Kotlin kind of got it right because it treats nullability as part of the type system. So like if you have a parameter that you want to allow it as null, you can just put a question mark, and Kotlin will force you to do a null check, the compiler, before you reference that attribute. It'll actually fail to compile if you don't. If you don't have the question marks, like if I do this, it's going to break.
Yeah.
Because it can't be null. It just can't be. And it'll force that.
For the record, for anybody who is polyglot brain, TypeScript does this too.
Yeah.
If you start throwing question marks around, it'll be like, oh, that could be something not expected. You better handle that. Yeah. Rust does something similar but different also. This when thingy feels very rusty to me too. Rust does something very similar.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like the new switch in Java 17, 18, 19, where you can do like switch statements, but you can actually assign it because it's essentially a switch, when, and then you give it an expression when something or something else. All right.
Cool.
So anyway, so that's Kotlin.
Now I'm going to have to learn Kotlin. All right. You've inspired me.
All right. So packed. So if we talk about, and I have a whole nother talk that I can talk about packed, and that Holly does it too. So if we kind of go back to our architecture diagram here, I don't have any, so I have packed tests that the fight service verifies from the UI, but I don't have the UI implemented it yet. So the fight service does verify that it has certain interactions that the client produced, but on the back end between packed, unfortunately right now doesn't support gRPC, so I don't have packed.
I thought it did.
Well, it has a plugin, but packed moved to a Java 17 baseline like 6 months ago, and because Quarkus was stuck on 11 as a baseline, we are stuck on the packed extension is stuck at a couple versions previous, which doesn't have the plugin support.
Right.
Now that Quarkus 3.7 is out, I'm sure that's going to change quickly. We can update the backend packed, and then we can bring gRPC in. But as of time of writing, we didn't have that ability.
Yeah, no, it works.
Between hero, villains, and narration, we do have packed tests. Now, you would usually use like a broker, a third party, to manage your contracts. Because this is a demo and it's a sample, we don't do that. We've got everything kind of baked in. So if we look at on the Fights app and go into the test, not Java resources, there's a bunch of there's one packed here between the UI and the fight service. And so when the fight service tests run, where did I put them here? Service. So when the fight service test run, it'll run this verification of the contract that the UI has stipulated and verify that it satisfies that contract.
Right. So Roberto, based on your comments earlier, this is where the producer is basically running against the consumer's payloads.
Oh, yeah.
So you know if you're breaking the expected interaction. I'm just tying the conversations together is all. So I'm not saying like I'm just, trying to connect dots.
Yep. So then on the client side, so the fight service is then the client of 4 other services, right? Did you want to say something, Roberto? I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, that's fine. Just carry on, and I'll add something later.
Yep. So on the flip side, the fight service has a ton. It talks. Well, right now it talks. I've only got tests for the 3 because we can't do the gRPC at the moment. So it talks to heroes, villains, and narration. And so it will actually configure 3 different mock servers, one for each of those services. And then it'll run, it sets up these different contracts where, what the backend service might have more operations than what this particular client actually uses. So this client is only specifying in the contract the things that it actually cares about, right? So there's a hello that it cares about. There's a a random villain when I ask for a random villain. If that villain is not found, so there's a case where maybe the back end has issues. As a consumer, I need to be able to handle the fact that the back end service errors out, and that's part of the contract. Like it has nothing, like it returns me nothing, and I need to be able to handle what it means to have nothing. I don't need to tell the backend service what it means to have nothing, just in the fact that if you give me nothing, I need to be able to handle that. And its pack test can decide what that means to have nothing, because what that state means. So random villain not found or random villain found. So it's a contract between fights and villains. Then similar between fights and heroes, there's hello, random hero not found, random hero found, and here's what the contract looks like. And then the narration again, hello, and then a narrate is a post, and here's what the body kind of looks like. Right. And then I've got all kinds. So this is so rather than just testing, if I were just to inject the REST client and make the request, sure, it would come back with a response. But what have I actually tested in that case? Right? All I did was test that Pact successfully stood up a mock server and gave me back the response that I told it to give it back. Right. So when we run these pack tests, we're actually running the test at a higher level. So we're actually running it in the business logic. Right. So I'm actually testing that when I call my service layer, which is what sits on top and does the orchestration of all the clients. So this is going to test for the contracts where both the hero, because when I make from the business perspective, the UI calls in and says, give me random fighters. And so as part of that, the fight service has to make 2 simultaneous calls, one to the fights and one to the heroes. And so there's if you compute all the different permutations of what could happen, you both could return nothing, both could return something, one could return something and one return nothing. So there's tests for all those different use cases because the fight service has fallbacks in the case where it gets nothing back or something breaks or a timeout happens or any of that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I find this part is the hardest when you're trying to learn contract testing.
Yes.
What you're talking about now is the hardest delineation to have in your mind because it's very easy to be like, oh, I should test the mock for the pact. It's like, no, then you're just testing pact. No, you need to test your stuff that uses pact.
Yep. So here I'm calling the get random fighters. And in this case, I'm calling these 2 contracts, the random hero not found, random villain not found. The pact will stand up a mock server, and based on which contract I'm telling it I want to interact with or which contracts, it'll know which response to serve. When the code gets down to actually make the call on the wire, it'll return the right thing for me. So when I get random fighters for that in that scenario, my assertion is that I'm getting the fallbacks hero and villain is what I should get back, which is actually what would go back to my consumer.
Right.
And then I get super crazy about verification and stuff. So, but anyway, you'll kind of start to see the same pattern. This is find random fighters. The hero's not found, but a villain is. And so I'm calling the same operation, but I'm asserting a different result that's getting sent back to my consumer here. And same, you can kind of visualize what the pattern is going to be here. Here's the heroes found, villains not found. Here's both are found. Find random fighters. Both of them are found. And then here's all the hellos that it all works.
Right.
And then I use a test profile, so a Quarkus test profile to configure my clients, the REST clients, to the URLs of the packed mock server. So it's actually making live calls over the wire. It's just something else running on localhost is intercepting.
Right. And the reason you do that, just so people understand packed, the reason you go against the local mocked packed server, there's a couple reasons. If you have that back end packed server set up, because it will record what your tests are. Right? It'll record what your test input was and stash it someplace when you're running against the server.
Yeah, if you had what they call a broker, so usually in reality, in the real world, you would have a broker which had all the contracts, and you actually even see the annotations I've got here on the top. Not on this one, but on the consumer. Like, if you wanted to use the broker, right now I'm looking at on the local file system for the contracts, but you would turn that off and turn on the broker and go to the broker, and the broker needs authentication even just to read from it. It's not anonymous read the way the broker works. So it would actually go to the broker, find all the contracts where the provider is me from any consumers, and it would pull those contracts and it would run all of its tests to make sure that it satisfied all of those contracts.
Right. So when you're in a big distributed environment with lots of consumers, this is the power for the consumer or for the producer, to Roberto's point. Because usually once you get into big multi-teams, you have many services using your service. You're not necessarily going to be able to test any one container because the sprawl starts to happen. And so where packed works is that you, just as the producer, you can go over all of the consumers, even if you don't exactly know what team it is, because of the broker and the way it records what's happening.
Yep. And on the consumer side, there's no annotations for this, but you could add, like in the Maven plugin, to publish the results and give it the key. And so when it finished its test suite, it would actually publish the contract to the broker, which the broker could then have a webhook, which triggered a build of the providers. And so now you've got a complete CI/CD solution.
Right. And you have a nice handshake and everybody has decoupled contract verification.
Yep.
Okay. So let me just add, we only have like a couple of minutes left, so we should need to start to wrap up. So do you have anything else that you want to conclude your awesome presentation for Superheroes?
Yeah, the only thing else I'll mention, and I don't have time to demo it, is so like people get confused with like when you start talking about benchmarking and JMeter and whatnot, and this whole coordinated omission problem. So we've actually built hyperfoil benchmarks for most of the apps here. So like for if I just look at one of them, for example, there's this hyperfoil directory. And if you look at the README, it tells you a little bit about it. But if you wanted to actually benchmark the whole operation of narrating a fight, right? What does it take to narrate a fight? You need to get random fighters. You need to get a random location. You need to perform the fight, get a winner, and then take that winner information and send it to the narration service. If you wanted to benchmark that entire process with adding in, like, as a human, if I were to do it, I'm going to click a button, I'm going to look, I'm going to wait for a second, I'm going to read what the response was, and then I'm going to click a button to simulate all that as a benchmark. That's all built, and you could run it with hyperfoil, and it would, change the number of users. You could up or decrease the number of users, the time it runs, and whatnot. So, unfortunately, I don't have time.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so that's all in the last year. That's all the new stuff in the last year.
That's a lot.
And that's just my side job. That's not my day job. So
okay, I think we don't have any much time left. So I just want to give like a couple, one last minute for you to tell us what do you expect for the next year.
Yeah, so for the next year, I've got a laundry list of things that I've been wanting to do for a long time, some of which have been around for 2 years. So I've actually got a pull request, which sets the baseline of everything to Java 21. I've been hesitant to merge it because I don't know. I don't know that everybody is there, and I don't want to force that. I'm thinking maybe in 6 months.
Native is the kicker for 21.
It works. It all works. It's there and it works. So the Superheroes have baselined Java 17 like 6 or almost a year ago. We baselined on 17, but I didn't want to merge it yet. but it's there and it's ready to go. One thing is, we talked about having the heroes and villains talk to each other and using like OpenAI to generate the like biographies and stuff. I don't have issues created for those, but those are kind of what we want to do. Helm, we've been wanting to do Helm for a long time, like Helm charts for deployments, having some way in the UI, because right now you just get random heroes and villains, like some way to select, or making them more fair, because one could have like way more powers than another and it's not really a fair fight. So having like maybe a slider where you can adjust to make things more fair. Auth Z and Auth N, I'd love right now there's no authorization, authentication, no OpenID Connect. We'd love to add some of that stuff in there. This one's been killing me. So like the WebSockets, if you were to leave the statistics service up for a while, it would lose the connection because the socket breaks. The WebSocket API has a ping pong, but it's not implemented in the Quarkus extension. And I'd love to see that. That should be a Quarkus thing, I think, because it seems to be anybody doing WebSockets probably wants that keep alive in there. So I didn't think that I should implement that in the superheroes. I think that should be a Quarkus thing. There's an issue for it that is out there.
I had to do that.
You probably use like sock.js, and sock.js will implement it on both sides for you.
No, I didn't. When I was doing Game on Text 12 years ago, my front end was pretty simple. I don't like doing libraries in some cases, so it was Angular. But I don't think I used a library for that. I think I had Angular going right to the WebSocket API. And I think I had a ping pong for other reasons. I think I did it myself.
Okay. So
anyway,
I think we're pretty much out of time. So you have like a big list over there. So let's schedule another call in a year to see how much you have progress with all of these. Well, we'll measure Quarkus progress and we'll measure Superheroes progress, right? So we'll see. I'm pretty excited to see what you'll have to show us next year. So anyway, for everyone, the attendees that were here with us today, I hope that you enjoyed the session. Thank you so much, Eric and
whatever her name is.
Sorry for helping doing today's show. Sorry because we're not really. This was just like a last minute thing. So we promise we're going to practice. So we're able to do this more often. Anyway, so thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see each other next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.